Welcome to my talk about algorithmically generated flower beds inspired by ancient and modern polychrome textiles. And you will know what all of those words mean at the end, I promise. My name is Rebecca. I'm a weaver and a programmer. I work with textiles, and I do a lot of computer simulations that I like to call digital textiles. This talk is about one flavor of those, inspired by my favorite weaving structure. So as a mini agenda, we are going to work through the title of this talk backwards. I'll start by talking about what polychrome textiles are, where they come from, and then get into how I taught a computer how to draw flowers. So that sounds good, let's get started. So what are ancient polychrome textiles? Polychrome is one of those art words that you use when the default is monochrome. Most weaving is not exactly monochrome, but usually you only use one color at a time for simplicity. Polychrome textiles are special because you use multiple colors of thread together in order to generate blocks of solid and blended colors. Polychrome tapestries date way back, like this Egyptian tapestry, from the 5th century. So polychrome is ancient, but it's modern too. These days, I have access to so many colors that ancient weavers would be extremely jealous. I wove these 2 blankets this summer while I was thinking about this talk. They use a weave structure called Crackle, which is an old Scandinavian weave structure that was popularized in America in the 1920s by Mary Meggs Atwater. She gave it the name Crackle because she thought Jämtlandsdräll was a bit of a mouthful for Americans. The fabric has these little blips of color on the back that poke through to the front, forming the crackles. That's where the name comes from. It reminded her of a crackle glaze on pottery. So polychrome crackle is a much more recent invention than traditional crackle. It really only dates back to the mid-20th century, but it is an incredibly versatile weave structure for playing with color and shapes, which is why I love it, and I'm really excited to share the crackle magic with you. So what makes Crackle special? Crackle produces 4 distinct textures where the threads are combined. Technically, it is a twill for people who know what twill is, but it doesn't really look like it because we use a lot of colors and we're obscuring the sort of underlying fabric structure. Crackle is what weavers call a block weave, and those are the large squares that you can see in the diagram. Those are the blocks. On 4 shafts, which is a pretty simple loom, we get 4 blocks. I've labeled them A, B, C, and D. If you have a more complicated loom, like it has 8 shafts, you get 8 blocks and a new kind of background texture, but we can't get into that. We would be here until Monday. So 4 blocks, 4 shafts. The crackle blocks form a diagonal line when you use them in order. The wiggly lines you see at the very top and far right of the diagram, we don't need to worry about those. Those are just instructions for the weaver. If you want to worry about them, if you look really closely, you'll see that going from left to right and top to bottom, they are the same shape. That's why there's an A, B, C, and D in both directions. Those strong diagonal lines appear because each pair of adjacent blocks has one float color in common. The floats are places where the yarns stay above or below the fabric for 3 threads, and that's what creates the pattern. Every block has 2 floats, and at a distance, they blend into new colors. I am using red, yellow, blue, and green yarns, but that's not the effect we get. The blocks are orange, purple, aqua, and yellow-green, and that will be easier to see if we zoom out. So the previous screenshot was from a weaving program called Fiberworks. It's really useful for weaving, but it doesn't really do the weird procedural art that I like to make, so I built something special in JavaScript. It takes 2 block sequences as input, that's the A, B, C, D, and uses them to create a digital quilt using SVGs. I translated the crackle textures into 4x4 SVG tiles, and the renderer fills in the grid with the correct texture for each combination of blocks. So that's cool, but how do we use it to draw flowers? We need to generate those sequences algorithmically, so that's what we're going to do next. The renderer takes those 2 inputs, which start out as lines. Eventually, we're going to teach the computer how to draw flowers, but we need to teach it how to draw a line first. We have 4 blocks to work with. We're calling them A, B, C, and D, and so we'll make an array to hold our alphabet. Every sequence will be made of just those 4 blocks. A line is a sequence of blocks in order. We can generate one by running through the array in either direction, forwards or backwards, and looping around when we get to one end of the array. We could skip over letters. Technically, that's fine, but it would give us breaks and discontinuities, and those would be really weird flowers. So we only want to generate continuous lines for our flowers. A single line can be interesting, right? Like those blankets I showed you earlier were based on a single line. But in order to draw flowers, we want some kind of symmetry. So the line has to flip it and reverse it. Drawing a point is as easy as generating 2 lines in opposite directions. You go up, A, B, C, D, and then you go back down, CBA, that forms a point. We can chain lines and points together to make more complicated shapes, But for now, we're going to stick with a single simple point. So this is what it looks like when we weave 2 points together. The bottom left quadrant of this flower has our familiar diagonal line, and then we've mirrored it in the other quadrants to form this roundish plus sign shape. This is an okay flower. It's not great. We can do better. It's sort of flower shaped. We can use it to make some more interesting shapes later. But first, we're going to talk about the math that got us to this point. We have to be able to determine which texture goes with which combination of blocks in order to draw these shapes. The textures don't really have names. I could call them orange, purple, blue, green, and yellow, green, but that would be really confusing if I ever changed colors. So I think it's more interesting to think of them as offsets. If you're using the same block in both directions, there's no offset. So you get the same texture whether you're using A with A or C with C. That's the sort of main orange diagonal line. If you use B with C, that's an offset of 1 because there's 1 step between B and C. If you use C with B, that's different. That's 3 steps because you have to go C, D, A to B. I know there's 4 letters, but that's 3 steps. All of the possible block combinations and offsets are in the table to the left. They aren't all symmetric, which I think is cool, and it gives us some interesting effects. I really like the way that the orange is always framed by the yellow on one side and the purple on the other, because it builds this really cool gradient effect into all of our lines. I think that's neat. So I really liked that fat plus sign shape, but it is not very flower-like. We need to make it more interesting by changing the shape of our diagonal lines, and we can do that by making some blocks wider and others more narrow. More repeats of a block will slow the line down so it stays flatter, and fewer repeats of a block will make it go up more sharply. My trick for drawing these shapes is to use the Fibonacci sequence because 2 Fibonacci numbers next to each other always looks nice. There are other ways to make nice curves using math, but since I have to debug this, I wanted to keep things simple. So here is that previous shape, but it has been stretched and squished into something that looks pretty much like a flower. Previously, each block was the same size, it had the same number of repeats, but now the first 2 blocks have shrunk and the middle block has expanded. This is why I use the Fibonacci sequence for everything. It just looks nice, right? Like, patterns like this are aesthetically pleasing, but they can get kind of boring because I tend to use the same sequences over and over again. I want to teach the computer how to do something more interesting than that. So here is the extremely sophisticated algorithm that goes into drawing flower beds. We start with 2 initial pieces of state. One, we choose a block size to start out with, and then we choose the direction for the block sizes. So if we want them to start getting bigger or start getting smaller, we're going to assume that the blocks are just going to get bigger initially, and we're going to start at block size 1. So for every letter in the sequence, we want to determine how many repeats it has based on the probabilities specified in the pie chart. These are completely arbitrary. I just fiddled with the numbers until it looked good to me. And the last piece of magic in this algorithm is if we are at the largest or smallest block size possible, we're going to flip a coin to determine if we want the block sizes to turn around and start increasing or start decreasing. So what happens if we go off the end of an array of our block sizes? Nothing. We don't go out of bounds. We just stay there. We have confidence that at some point the sizes will start turning around and we'll go back the other direction. So we have everything we need to draw flower beds now. I said we can chain lines and points together earlier to make more complex shapes, so that's what we're going to do. We can tell the algorithm how many points we want in our line or our wiggle. We can stretch that sequence, and then we can generate another one for the other direction. There's always the vertical direction and the horizontal direction, which I really like doing backwards. So that's all the technical stuff. We get to do fun show and tell now. Let's look at what the computer came up with. I don't know how well you can see this, but all of my photos and slides are on Discord if you want to follow along there. So I think these are super cool. The tool generates a new image every time I refresh the page, and there's just an endless supply of these cool multi-flowers. When I'm weaving, I generate a bunch, and then I crop them, which is also what I did here. I cropped the images to fit on the slides. And speaking of weaving, just to prove to you that the renderer is based on something real and not something I made up, this is a towel and its digital counterpart. You can tell that I didn't auto-generate this one because all of the blocks are about the same size, because I am not very adventurous with the big chunky blocks. Some of the pieces I wove on this warp were all my designs, and some of them were collaborations between me and what I'm calling the Neat Shapes machine. We don't have time to look at everything, but I did bring it with me. You can check it out at lunch, whenever. It's in the big yellow bag. I'm really friendly, but I'm really bad at talking to people, so sorry about that. And also in the Discord, in the channel, I posted pictures of all of these so people online can see them too. So this is a piece I collaborated with the computer on. It drew the flowers and I chose the colors. I wanted to make something for my mom's birthday. Her favorite color is blue, and I love how this came out. Like, I think the computer is better at drawing flowers than I am at this point. I love it when the things I make surprise me. So why is this useful outside of my extremely specific interest in blobby pixelated flowers? So we get to talk a little bit about looms and how they are weird computers. They both have threads, more than just the funny joke sense. Looms are highly parallelizable. I can simultaneously weave as many flowers as I can fit on my 40-inch loom. But they also have very limited memory capabilities, assuming you're not using something fancy. The loom I have 6 memory slots, and I have to program them by manually tying pieces of rope to pieces of wood. And my color choices are limited to whatever yarn I have on hand. So if we think about computers that have limited memory and limited color palettes, I think about retro pixel games. I know there are some out there that use a very similar concept to generate things. Earthbound, I think, uses this for its battle backgrounds. But there are lots of other applications if you really think about it. So thank you, we made it. I don't know how the computer learned to generate exclamation points, but I do love when the things I make surprise me. Just some acknowledgements. Susan Wilson wrote a great book about Crackle. I referenced it a lot. I used svj.js and mvp.css to make everything look nice. And then my partner helped me with everything here. He is taking care of our cats right now, but he is my DevOps and my everything. So thank you, Martin. And here are all of the links. These are also in the Discord. I won't read them all out loud. Thank you so much.